and Inclusion Services at Jewish Family Services. JFS offers many programs, including geriatric care management, counseling, support groups, a friendly caller program, food cupboard, clothes closet, and program volunteer opportunities, just to name a few. Please feel free to reach out to me to learn more, or if you have any questions. I will be putting my contact information into the chat box. I would like to thank the committee members, Jill Stenger and Vicki Finnefrock, for helping with the planning of this caregiver series. A special thanks to Barbara Connor for marketing and promoting this series. Before I introduce you to our first guest, there are a few housekeeping details. Please make sure that you are muted. The series is being recorded and the links will be sent out. Closed captioning is available. Please push the button at the bottom of the screen to request it. Feel free to write your questions in the chat. We will be monitoring your chat and will take questions at the end. Before I turn the mic over to Rabbi Auerbach and attorney Howard Sharfstein, I will share a bit more about the two of them. Rabbi Auerbach directs a wide range of adult programming at Central Synagogue in New York City, geared toward connecting members more deeply with one another. Rabbi Auerbach does this by providing content, coaching, and support for lay-led small groups that allow congregants to connect more deeply with one another, with their Jewish tradition, and with God. Howard is a 40-plus year member of the Central Synagogue in New York City, where he was board president. Howard is also an attorney, a two-time cancer survivor. He is married to a wonderful woman, has 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Both Rabbi Auerbach and Howard are certified trained facilitators in What Matters. What Matters trains individuals to be facilitators to enable them to teach individuals to engage in advanced care planning infused with Jewish wisdom to think about, plan for, and take steps to ensure that when the time comes, their end-of-life wishes will be respected and honored. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce you to Rabbi Auerbach and Howard Sharfstein.
Thank you so much, Dee. It was such a treat to get this invitation, in part because it's always a treat for me to get to speak with my friend and teacher, Howard Sharfstein. As you heard, Howard is a leader in our congregation, but he is really the heart and soul of our work around the experience of life in sort of the third chapter of life. He was in our Wise Aging, a key leader in our Wise Aging groups, and also does a lot of work on this What Matters. So we're going to hear from Howard in just a minute. But first, I wanted to take a moment to address a question that some folks may be sitting with when they came to this. So what is Jewish about this? For a people that tend to at any mention of death, it's, for some it's a question, is it even appropriate to anticipate our own death or to consider what measures may be taken or not to prolong our lives? And so I want to come with an emphatic yes, this is a Jewish conversation. Our first example of end-of-life planning in our tradition comes in the story of Jacob in the book of Genesis. It says, the time came when Israel knew that he would soon die. Reminder, Israel means Jacob here. So he called his son Joseph to him. He said, if you love me, put your hand under my leg and make a promise. Promise that you will do what I say and that you will be truthful with me. When I die, don't bury me in Egypt. And so here we see Jacob acknowledging, number one, that he will die, which is an inconvenient fact that we sometimes don't like to grapple with. And number two, speaking to his son about his wishes at the end of his life. And he entrusts Jacob to carry those wishes out and to make sure that the end of his life and his burial go as he hopes. We also, in our tradition, have a different kind of reflection in the form of ethical wills. These are documents that Jews have made for hundreds of years, contemplating the meaning and the legacy of their life through the values that we intend to pass on. And an ethical will project is a wonderful way to both reflect on your own life and values and also share that with the next generations. And finally, I want to reassure everyone that there's nothing un-Jewish about considering foregoing care that would prolong suffering at the end of life. It is, of course, true in our tradition that preserving life is of the highest value. It trumps all of the other commandments, right? You can light a big bonfire on Shabbat if for some reason that would save a life. But at the same time, our tradition is clear that when death is imminent, we need not place artificial barriers to delay the inevitable. And obviously the line between withdrawing necessary care and preventing a natural death can be a fine one. And I encourage those of you who belong to synagogues or Jewish communities, if you're interested in the Jewish law around that issue, I'm sure clergy would love nothing more than to have an in-depth conversation about that. That's exactly the kind of thing that we love to do. And finally, just a personal plea. I don't know most of you, but for what it's worth, one of the most difficult conversations that clergy have when speaking to people whose loved ones are coming to the end of their lives occurs when a person is dying and can't communicate and has failed to make their wishes known. It's a tremendous burden to ask the members of the family to make these decisions for us, not knowing what we would have chosen. And it really is a gift, an act of kindness and compassion to give them the peace of mind that when they make a difficult decision that they are doing so honoring our wishes. And it really allows them to instead focus on the sacred task of accompanying us as we reach the end. So that is my pitch. And so with that, Howard, I wanted to turn it to you to tell us a little bit about what brought you to this work and why it's so important to you.
Thank you, Nicole. That was beautiful. In a few minutes, you really broke my heart and my mind, and it was truly touching. Thank you. As you'll hear, as we go through this hour together, that I am very passionate about this issue. Nicole mentioned the word gift, and that's how I have looked at this whole matter of end-of-life conversations as one of our most important gifts that we can give our loved ones. I'll speak about that shortly, but my journey to this place came about through living. And it's what we all experience in some form or another. Living, getting ill. I had two life-challenging brushes with cancer, and each time the doctors were very properly conservative in their prognoses. One of them when I was 46, and the other 8 years later. At 46, I kind of brushed off the thought that I might die. At 46, you think you'll live forever, no matter what the circumstances. 8 years later, when the cancer came back, I had an entirely different view. And mortality was staring me right in the eye. And part of my treatment involved over 4 months in isolation in the hospital. And you have a lot of time to think about a lot of things. And the one thing that I thought about the most was dying and my family and what I needed to say and what I wanted them to know. And when I was in the hospital, I was visited often by a chaplain. He happened to be a rabbi, but he didn't have to be Jewish, but it was. And he and I had conversations that I was not yet ready to share with my family. When I got out of the hospital and started recovering, I enrolled to become a chaplain. I'm halfway through my course of study and hope someday to get back to it. But as part of the training to be a chaplain, you need to do clinical work. You need to be in a hospital dealing with patients. And I was in a cardiac intensive care unit at one hospital, and in another hospital, I was in a chronic care sort of facility where the people had been in the hospital for a long, long time. And I witnessed what it was like to be in that hospital bed and to be dealing with very difficult issues. I then was introduced to end-of-life planning through a book, Being Mortal, by Dr. Atul Gawande. I recommend this book with as much strength as I can. Being Mortal. He's a wonderful doctor, writes often for the New Yorker, and he said, we doctors are very good at keeping you alive. We can keep you alive. What we don't deal with is quality of life. And you, the patient, have to make a decision as to how you define your quality of life. And in the story that he told that particularly touched me was about his father, also a physician who was dying, and had said, what I want to watch baseball games and eat chocolate ice cream. And if I can't do that, then my quality of life is so diminished that you should let me go. After reading that book, I got involved with the What Matters program. We'll talk about the process today. But I can think of nothing more important as a legacy, as a gift that you can leave your family with, telling them what you want at end of life if you're no longer able to speak for yourself. While you're alive and able to speak, you determine all your healthcare decisions. But when you can't speak, who can speak for you and what should they do? That's the question we're going to be dealing with today.
Thank you, Howard. I know that your passion for this work is also informed by your own experience with your father at the end of his life.
Yes, my father, my dear father, like a lot of older Jewish people, was living in Florida when he suffered a terrible stroke. And the doctors came to my brother and I, and my brother is a doctor, and said to us, we can put in, he can't swallow because of the stroke, but we can put in a feeding tube and he can stay alive for an indeterminate period of time in a very dependent state. Future is unclear, if not dark. What do you want us to do? Put in the feeding tube or not? My brother, being a physician, sort of leaned towards the science of putting in the feeding tube and see what happens. But our father had spoken to us. He had said, I don't want to be dependent. I don't want to sit in a chair all day, unable to do what I love and unable to communicate with people that I love. And the decision was made not to put in the feeding tube. He went into hospice and died 2 or 3 days later. He looked very peaceful at the time. That really strengthened my dedication to this process. And I'm confident all of us have experienced the loss of loved ones. And I have found, and maybe it's just me, that the memory of how someone died is something that stays with us for a long, long time. The moment of death, how they died, where they died. And if we can make that process better, more sensitive to the wishes of the patient, perhaps we could make the memories better, stronger, more emotionally pure by saying we did what he or she wanted. So that's another reason I'm passionate about this.
Thank you. So I want to think a minute about the particular questions that can help us get to that baseball and chocolate ice cream standard, right? How do we identify those questions? And I know that we have a tool, a living will, that we can share both afterwards, and we can take a look at some of those questions. But I guess, I think sometimes when we think about a living will, people think that it is about, well, I need to decide, do I want to be intubated? Do I want artificial nutrition? How specific do I need to get about what I want? And so what's the most important thing for people to both think about for themselves and to share with their loved ones when it comes to having these conversations?
Again, it comes to what is really meaningful in your life. The standard that I look at is, if your treating physicians certify that there is no reasonable expectation of recovery to a meaningful quality of life, then I direct as follows in my living will: withhold care, make me comfortable, I want to die at home, don't want extraordinary measures, I don't want to be resuscitated if my heart should stop. And when we look at the living will, you'll see that all of those options are put there, expressed. But while it's important to specifically lay out what you want, it's also important to frame in your own mind your definition of meaningful. For someone who loves to read, if they can't read, how does that affect the quality of their life? For someone who loves to spend important time with family, grandchildren, and they can't, because they can't communicate, they can't express, they can't share, is that meaningful to you? And if that isn't available because of your medical condition, what would you want? Now, we don't have assisted suicide in New York, but we can direct withholding of care. Spoke about my father. My mother, God bless her, was a very strong-willed woman. And when she was in her last months, she said, "Okay, that's it." And she stopped eating. She made the choice. She slowly disappeared before her eyes. And that was very wonderful to us, because she took it under her control. She was able to state it for herself. But if she wasn't able to do it, because she couldn't share, then we knew what she wanted because she had told us. So it's very important that you frame your wishes. And then the question is, who do you tell? Who should know what your wishes are?
Let me pause you there for a minute, Howard. I want to emphasize that this is not a one-time moment of reflection, right? Because we change over the course of our lives, right? Like, something that I might imagine I wouldn't want to live with now, living in the body that I'm living in. My opinion may change, God willing, 30 years from now, when I find that different things are what might make life worth living than I can imagine right now. And I know the first time that I thought about these questions was when I had kids, because I was already, felt like, okay, now I have to do a will, I have to get my affairs in order, so I might as well fill out this next thing. But I'm also a different person now that my kids are in high school than I was when they were babies. And so I'm curious about what are sort of the natural times when it's good to revisit this question. How often should we revisit this question for ourselves?
Well, well, first of all, at critical moments in life, a diagnosis, a divorce, witnessing the death of a loved one. Periodically, I say to my clients, I don't want to ruin your New Year's Day, but why don't you look at your important documents on New Year's Day. Look at your will.
And I'll put a plug in for Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is actually the holiday where we are supposed to face our mortality and the fact that we might not, be written in the book of life. You're not eating, so you might as well, take a look and see, is this still how I feel about my life? So, maybe we need a new Yom Kippur ritual that is about reading our living wills. And Howard knows this about me, but I keep a file folder called Hit by a Bus in my home, which is the file folder for if my husband and I, God forbid, are in an accident and can't speak for ourselves. Here's all the stuff, right? The insurance stuff, the will, our living wills, etc. We have shared copies of all of those things with the folks who would need to make the decisions in that situation. Howard, the last time we had this conversation, you nudged me to say, how recently have you had a conversation with your sister about what you want, right? How long has it been? So that's been very helpful. So I wonder if, let me share maybe the living will that we have, and we can, just so folks can see a little bit what kinds of questions there are, and then we can turn to the question of who we need to let know. So I'm going to put this up on our screen here. I can find it.
Let me just say that Nicole has a folder called If Hit by a Bus. After I heard about that, I created a folder called When Shit Happened. And I think I have in that folder much of what Nicole has. I'll talk about what's in my folder later.
Well, it is, it's good to have some dark humor around the process. It's a hard thing to talk about, and if humor is what helps us actually get the work done, I think that's fine. So up on this sheet, which we're happy to distribute to everyone after the program. First, we're designating a healthcare agent, also known as a proxy, and Howard will talk in a couple minutes about how do we pick the right person to act as our agent in the event that we're unable to express our wishes. And then we get into these questions, which we can answer in our own words, right? These aren't check boxes of yes, yes, hydration, no nutrition. It's a more holistic document. So these are some of the experiences I've had with friends, relatives, acquaintances, or public figures I have read about who become seriously ill and the ways in which they've influenced my own wishes. So in the same way that Howard reflects on the death of his own parents and his experience with that, right, that informs how he wants to die. Some of us aren't lucky enough to have witnessed what we would call a good death, and instead have witnessed a life that was prolonged such that the person suffered more than we would have hoped for them, and that may be instead, that counterexample may be what informs what we want. But it's nice for folks to know, what are we thinking about? A good day for me right now looks like ... right? Because let's think about my teenage kids, right? Who are not going to be my healthcare proxies because they are teenagers. Their view of what a good day is and mine are very different, right? A good day for me is sitting in my bed, knitting, and reading a good book, right? That is not their idea of a good day. And so if they're measuring my life against, being able to stay out till midnight and go to concerts, we're gonna have different visions of what a good life is. And I'm using that as a silly example, but I think it's important for folks to know what counts as a good day, right? If you're like, if I can still watch C-SPAN, I'm having a good day, that's important to know. These are the things that give me strength and provide meaning and purpose in my life. So might be volunteer work or faith or creativity, being able to do art, pets, right? These are some of the specific things that your loved ones can look and say, like, well, they still are able to really enjoy a lot of things that are giving them strength and providing them meaning. These are my religious Jewish cultural or spiritual beliefs or practices that provide comfort. And the quality of life that I currently feel would be unacceptable to me would include. And so some examples here are being unable to enjoy eating, right? Being in pain, being a burden to my family, not recognizing those I love, a lack of independence, not being at home. And those answers may be different for different people. And then finally, there is this question of if you're unable to speak for yourself and it has been determined that you have little chance to recover, do you want to continue medical treatment or not? But hopefully the answer to that question is informed by all of these experiences that come from our greatest teacher, which is life, which is, hopefully we know what's important to us. So those are some of the questions. Anything you would like to add, Howard?
No, those are the questions, Nicole, and that's exactly what I call step one in this process. And it's probably the hardest. You have to be very honest with yourself. You can't deceive yourself in any way. You have to really look in the mirror and know what you would want facing end of life and not able to speak for yourself. Step two is naming someone to act on your behalf. And that's your healthcare proxy.
Alan Steinberg just sent me a message that said, don't forget the perspective of the serious responsibility and obligations and burdens on who's designated. He says, it's bizarrely not that uncommon for people not to have been told that they've been chosen as someone's healthcare proxy. So we're gonna get to what that conversation is. So let's talk a little bit about how do you choose the right person?
That being named a proxy is, I've always talked that the whole process is a gift. Well, being named the proxy is not so much of a gift. It's a very serious responsibility. So you need to find someone in your life who is a good listener, who respects you, who understands why you're doing what you're doing in expressing your wishes, and says to you, most importantly, I will follow your wishes. I hear you, and I will do as you say. Now, they are not legally bound to do what you say and what you tell them that you want to happen or not happen. They are legally in place as the person who will make all of your healthcare decisions. That includes a doctor comes and says, we can operate and we think there's a very good chance he'll get better. Can we get your authorization? Yes, a proxy has the power to do that. If a doctor comes and says, we can operate, but the prognosis is dim, the proxy has the power to say, don't operate. The proxy and you have to sit and talk and come to an understanding. In my experience, where proxies have had to act for individuals to a person, they spoke consistently and strongly on behalf of the person lying in the bed, saying this is what he or she would have wanted. So you need to pick a proxy. It doesn't have to be a family member. It's common that people's spouses appoint each other. If they do, then in that circumstance, they need to appoint a successor. In New York, you can only name one proxy at a time. You can't name more than one at a time. For the obvious reasons, they don't want proxies to disagree. If you have, for instance, more than one child, you would have to pick one over the other. I think you have the burden of explaining to your children why you picked one over the other.
Presumably because one of them is your favorite, right?
Yeah. It's hard to say that, He's my favorite, you're not. But that's not what it's a reason. Sometimes the reason is physical proximity. They live near where you live, and they can be in the hospital. I've also seen in these days of what we're doing now, your proxy could live anywhere. And, Zoom as if they're standing in the room. But it's very important to get the proxy's consent and spoken, firm acknowledgement that they will follow what you want. Nicole spoke about she needed to have another conversation with her sister. Yeah, you do. You do need to, occasionally bring it up and find out that they still are in the same state of mind as you are. You can find the form of healthcare proxy online, New York. I send a copy to Dee. She can share it with you. It's easy to fill out. And what do you do with the proxy once you signed it? You should give a copy to your primary care physician. Obviously, the people you've named as proxies should have one. You should put a copy on your refrigerator. I've also sent a form of a card that you can put in your wallet. It says, I have a healthcare proxy, and the person named is so-and-so. Carry that around. When you check into a hospital, hospital's going to ask, do you have a proxy? Yes, you do, and you hand it to them. You tell the world. You tell the world who it is and where it is. That's very, very important.
And one of the items that we're going to include in the gift bag from this conversation is a card that you can put in your wallet that says, I have these documents, this is where you can find them in my home, so that, folks actually know where to look, which is very helpful.
Well, I've told this story over and over again, and I'll tell it again. A person dies, and those who survive are in a very tenuous, sad place. They should not be burdened with not knowing about your stuff, for lack of a better word. And that's the folder that Nicole spoke about and that I spoke about. Your important documents are in the folder. You also put into the folder contact information for the people who they'll have to contact. Your accountant, your insurance broker, your investment advisor, your whatever, your doctors. The proxy should have access, and those who survive you should have access to all of that information. Don't die without sharing that information. My wife and I are going on a trip on Thursday. On my desk is the folder, and right on top of the folder is a 2-page where everything is. And
on behalf of your clergy, if you have them, I will also ask you to include, if you have already bought a burial plot, tell us which cemetery and where it is. And also your Hebrew name, very good thing to have in that file. If you want someone to come say prayers using your Hebrew name, no one ever remembers, we can't find your ketubah. So throw that in there just as a gift to your clergy.
also, Nicole talked about an ethical will. My wife and I just wrote ours this morning before our trip. And it's an expression of what we hope to reflect the values we've lived by, that we hope our children and grandchildren will understand and have those values affect their lives. We wish that they are good people, contributing people. I wish that they remember us well. I've had clients write ethical wills that are, quite frankly, quite unethical. Speaking about the need to make money and making that a primary focus, or scolding the child for something they did or didn't do that they were not prepared to speak to the child about when they were alive. But you shouldn't do that, and you won't do that. If you do an ethical will, it should be from your heart. And it's a big part of your legacy. A lot about what we're talking about are the objective things, the objective care, the objective who's to make your decision. There's also a big subjective part, which is who you are as a person, and how do you share that with your loved ones. And that would be an ethical will. That has no legal requirements, that you write in your own hand and stick it in the form.
Great. So I see we have a question here. Karen says, I've witnessed elderly patients who have a living will in place and say they want to live, yet the ER convinces them on the spot to sign a DNR when it's not a life-threatening situation. Can we discuss how this is a widespread issue in the healthcare industry when treating the elderly? And also, Howard, I thought this would be a good time to discuss a different form, which is the MOLST form, so that you could tell us what that is and talk a little bit about. So in your experience, how much of these wishes are honored or not honored? And can you tell us a little about this other form?
Well, the wishes are in my situation, almost always followed. I had a client who did not like his children and who named me as his healthcare proxy, knowing I would follow his wishes at end of life. He was 96 years old or so. In fact, he had, over the years, taken one pill out of every prescription he ever got, stuck it in a jar. The jar was full of pills, and he said, I want you to administer these to me so that I'll die. I said, I can't do that. That's against the law. But I knew what he wanted at end of life as to care. His children didn't agree with me. And what they did was, at a time that he was probably not knowing what he was doing, he signed another healthcare proxy naming them. They kept him alive for another 3 months, and he was miserable. So in that case, the wishes were not followed. The MOLST form, remind me, Nicole, I'm not too proud to say I'm not exactly sure what that's. It's an acronym, and I don't remember.
Yes, it is. I'm looking it up right now. Medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. And I know that it is a form that you need to fill out. I think, do you fill it out with your doctor? It's a form that hospitals will recognize about wanting to avoid any life-sustaining treatment. So it's basically DNR form.
I'll just pipe in there. Oftentimes, people that are at independent assisted livings, skilled nursing, in their homes, it's the bright pink form that people put on refrigerators, and that they can grab it. The ambulance can grab it right with them and bring it to the hospital.
Great.
The situation that the chat person asked about, where the nursing home had the patient sign a DNR. Sadly, that does happen, and assuming the patient was competent, that's perfectly legal. Whether it's, the right thing to do or not, I have doubts, but I too know that experience.
Well, and sorry, go ahead.
The other thing, all that we're talking about is we don't know exactly what the situation will be. We don't know. All we can do is do our best to plan and to think about it and to share. But you never know the exact circumstance that's going to pertain. So I wish I could say, do this and it's totally predictable and done forever. You just don't know what's going to be when you're in the hospital, not able to talk for yourself, and questions arise as to what kind of care, what level of care, etc. You just don't know what the situation is going to be.
Right, and I want to say also, if you're someone who does want continued care, even if the chances are very slim, that's okay. That's a thing that you are entitled to want, and it's just important. It's just as important to get your family on board if that's your decision, right? Or your healthcare proxy on board if that is what you want, to make sure that they're going to feel comfortable saying, you know what, I know it's a 3% chance, but you know, Dad said that no matter what, right, he wanted his life extended. That's not my decision, but it is a decision that should be respected if someone has it. And the other thing I was going to say is, Howard, what you were talking about, I think, is why it's so much more helpful to start from this place of, here's what makes my life worth living. This is a good day for me. Here's what brings me joy and meaning, right? Because if we focus on a situation, right? So and so died of cancer. I saw them die this way. I don't want to die that way. That doesn't help if, you know, you're hit by a bus and you have a whole different constellation of decisions that are going to need to be made about you. But if we know that what really makes life worth living is the ability to have a conversation with your grandchildren, right? That is a standard that we can apply in a number of different medical situations, rather than imagining that we're going to be able to know every single circumstance that comes up.
Well, yeah, there's a very famous case in New York of a woman who was a nurse in oncology, uh, part of a hospital, and she said to her daughters, "I don't want to die like my patients." And she had this was 25 years ago, before a lot of this world has evolved. And she told her daughters that, and then she had a stroke. And the daughters wanted to stop care. The hospital wouldn't do it. There was no such thing as a healthcare proxy at the time. So they went to court. And the judge said, "Did your mother talk about what she wanted if she had a stroke?" And they said no, and they kept her alive. So it's again, we don't know the exact circumstances, but the world and the law has evolved that if you have the conversation and you share it with those who know, and you get their assurance, who should know, and you get their assurance that it'll be followed, it will be followed. I have this one caveat, and I apologize if this offends anybody, but Catholic hospitals, it's more difficult, I have found with clients and friends. And if you run into any kind of difficulty at a particular hospital, move the patient. That's what you need to do. I cannot think of anything more important than that the wishes of the patient are followed. I can't explain the hesitation that I see among people in having this conversation. We offer at Central, Nicole, myself, and a cadre of other trained facilitators, the opportunity to sit down with a congregant and have this conversation, and then sit down with the congregant and the proxy to share the information that the congregant wants. And can I tell you with all honesty that we've had an overwhelming response? No, but we're not going to give up. People are going to come to realize the importance of this conversation.
I was going to ask you, Howard. So sometimes someone wants to have the conversation and the other person says, no, 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 let's not talk about that. We have years to go, right? And so sometimes it's the person who, you know, sometimes someone's going to their parent or to say, you know, can we have a conversation about what you would want? And then there's offense of like, what, you think I'm dying, right? And sometimes it's the parent who wants to talk about it with the kids, and the kids don't want to have the conversation. So do you have any advice for when there is resistance on either end of that equation?
Well, it's as you said earlier, Nicole, it's the poo, poo, poo. I mean, we don't want to speak about this. In my case, we were with our children, sitting on the shore of a lake at sunset, and it was quite beautiful. And I said, now Mom and I want to talk about our end of life wishes. And they absolutely said they didn't want to do it. And I said, tough, we're going to do it. And you're going to sit there and you're going to listen and you're going to acknowledge that you understand what we want. And we periodically bring it up. I, threatened to bring it up at the Seder, and they certainly don't want to hear it then, but they know what we want. And I feel better knowing that they know and that they've told us that they're going to follow our wishes. I can think of, as I've said this over and over again, I can't help myself. What a gift. What a gift to your loved ones to focus on this, to come to your own conclusions, and to share it. I've spoken about this from the Bima at Central. We spend time on our wills and we talk about our stuff, our money, our things, whatever. And a lot of people I know spend a lot of time doing that. They also need to do this. You also need to do this.
And I know that Dee sent out to everyone the forms that will allow them to do this along with the email this morning. So, and Central is not the only What Matters location. The What Matters initiative covers a bunch of institutions, and there are tons of resources that are online and free to use. So I wanted, unless there's anything else, Howard, I thought we might turn to questions now. So Jill says, when a person defines end of life as when there is no chance of quality of life and is unwilling to define that, will you please advise?
Well, I think if you're unwilling to define it, you're not meeting your obligation, your responsibility to yourself and to those who should know. Everybody knows what makes their life meaningful. People, places, things that you do. That was taken away from me for 4 months when I was in isolation. It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. So picture yourself in the same situation, and you will understand what gives you meaning in your life. And if it's gone, what does it mean to be alive? As Gandhi's book says, doctors will, they're, I think, oath bound to keep you alive without reference to quality. Now it's your burden. The next step is your burden. And if we simply ignore it, then we're giving rise to potential strife, heartache, potentially a cost of indeterminate amount. It's not the way to go. It's not the way to go. We've lived a good life. Now we want a good death.
Yeah.
So could I just ask if you could recommend, and maybe the question is to you, Rabbi, just some language to help with that shift when you are in that situation, how you could encourage the person to move in that direction when they say, when I don't have quality of life, and they are fearful of just saying anything more. So I'm open to hearing any language that it would encourage that shift.
So I think one way to think of it might be, what makes you feel like you? right? And for some people, that's going to be their relationship with family. For some people, that's their ability to, take a walk in the woods, right? What makes you feel like you, that without that thing, you feel like you wouldn't really be yourself? So that's one framing. I think another way to think about it is, if you lost everything else, right? What's the thing that, your life would be worth it if you could have that thing? Or, a list, right? If I have, if I can have a conversation, if I am aware of the people, if I recognize my family members, and if I'm able to feed myself, like, that's a standard of living I could live with. I mean, sometimes it's, it's a matter of sort of suggesting things, because people might not have thought of that, right? They might not have thought of, oh, actually, if I can't recognize anyone anymore, that's going to figure in. Or, it's really important that I be able to feed myself. For some people, who are, it's a matter of privacy. They, if they're going to require help with all of their bodily processes, right? Like, that is a level of invasion that is going to make it very difficult for them. I don't know, Howard, do you have any tricks to get people to think more deeply about that?
Tricks.
What are good questions that help people think through that question?
You want to be dependent. As you just mentioned, is living a life where the normal day-to-day parts of life are dependent, you're dependent on other people to do for you, in a manner that you can't, again, we're assuming you can't speak for yourself. How would you feel if that was the case? Richard Dreyfuss was in a movie some years ago. It was called Something Life, where he was a quadriplegic. He spoke in that movie about every moment of every day requiring the help of people or machines. And he felt like a machine himself. So it's a question of being dependent to me. And that necessarily, I think, follows that a lot of the other things that gave you quality were taken away from you.
Yeah, so Alan Steinberg commented that it's important to have these discussions before they are needed. It's why I love your example of the time on the lake on vacation with your kids, right? Because the time to have this conversation, ideally, is not when everyone is already emotionally worked up and fraught, and they're like, no, it's all going to be fine. Nothing is ever going to happen to you, right? All of their defenses are kicked in. The time to have this is when people are otherwise not stressed out. So that's a good question.
Yes,
And I also want to add, Howard, for some of us, that depending on mechanical support or caregiver support might figure in. We know that there are many people who are, disabled, who that's the way they live their lives, and they have beautiful, meaningful lives. It doesn't mean that relying on help or machines makes a life not worth living. It's really just sometimes painting different pictures can help people get into the details, and also being open to the fact that it might change, right? Someone who has been a marathon runner might imagine, if I'm ever, lose my mobility, that is not worth living. Well, 20 years down the road, right, when they've been enjoying visits with their grandkids from a wheelchair or whatever, they might make a very different decision. And that's why it's really important to come back.
Oh yeah, and this is the most personal decision. There are no rules on what your decision should be. This is you. This is what you want for yourself. And if your family disagrees with you, then you talk it out with them, and you come to some understanding. I'm a big believer in talking. Things unsaid are things that fester. And, thoughtful talk is the way to address this and a whole bunch of other things in life. Look, I'm 76. My thoughts about this are far different than when I was 20 years younger, even with my medical history. You know, I've lived a great life, great family, and the whole thing. I don't, and I want to continue that. But it's got to be good. It's just not life itself. It's just not breathing. It's got to be good. And that's the kind of thought you have to have. Then you got to execute a proxy. If you don't execute a proxy in New York, there's a statute that says that now we'll go by consanguinity as to who will make your decision. It'll be your spouse, then it'll be your children, then it'll be your cousins. It takes away entirely your own self-determination of who should make your decisions. The healthcare proxy law came about because of HIV. People dying of AIDS wanted their partners to make the decision, but under law, they were not in a position to make the decisions for medical care for the patient. It was the parents. And I'm sure you remember a number of cases where friends or acquaintances who were dying of HIV and their partner wanted one thing, I most likely let them die, and the parents wanted something else. They put in the healthcare proxy law to address that situation. Things change. Medical diseases change. Look what we just went through. Who would have thought? You know, mortality is there in sharp focus, and now you need to think about what your wishes are at the end. Again, I have to, modify that by saying we just don't know the exact situation that might pertain.
Right. Our tradition says, repent the day before you die. The problem is, of course, you never know what that's going to be. so we build in chances. Well, I want to make sure that we have enough time for any other questions that come in. So, Alan says that he thought that the healthcare proxy came from the Quinn and Cruzan cases. Do we know? And were those state or federal? I imagine they were state cases. But
The Quinn case definitely was part of the world as it changed. No question about it. What Talia wrote here is that yes, situations as to care change over time. And someone who is of the mind that I want to be around to experience that change, that's fine. This whole matter is based upon respect and the respect for someone's wishes. If someone wishes to say, hey, it may not be good now, but let's keep plugging and who knows what's going to happen, fine. I respect that. If someone says, I don't want to hang around to see what happens, that's let me go now. I respect that too. All we're asking, all Nicole and I are asking, that you think about it and act upon it and appoint a proxy and, look at a living will. Consider it an ethical will. You should also, as a prudent person, have a power of attorney where you name someone to act on your behalf as to business and financial matters if you can't do it yourself. There's a New York form of power of attorney on the web, easily accessible. You should have that in the folder too. A lot of things to do. A lot of things to do.
Karen says National Estate Planning Awareness Week is October 17th. Howard, we have some program planning to do for that week, it looks like. Any other questions that folks are wondering? Would anyone consider asking their adult children these same questions with genuine curiosity? Might it begin a two-way conversation? We can agree it's unlikely we'll need this info for a long time, but today, what gives greatest value to your life? I think it's a really important conversation to have with your adult children because, first of all, you know, if they're not partnered and they don't fill out a proxy, you're going to end up making this decision for them. And so, it's important. And I think it can also take away a little bit of the stigma of like having this conversation makes me, means that I think you're ready to die, or because if it's going both ways, then it becomes a real conversation about values. And it can become a beautiful conversation about shared values or differences, right, that you have. Sarah asks, did my questions get answered? That is something only you can know, Sarah. Let me look and see if I can find them. Sarah said, does one need to define meaningful in writing, since mine may vary greatly from my executor? So yes, I would say you need to define what meaningful means to you for those reasons. If you have other questions, Sarah, that did not get answered, I apologize, and we're happy to do that.
Sarah, it's important that whoever you name as your healthcare proxy or executor of your will, that they know they've been named, and that they you express to them what you expect of them and what their obligations are, and they need to acknowledge that yes, I'll do it. It's a blessing, and it's a burden. It's a blessing that you chose to name them. The burden is following through and doing it.
Well, in Hebrew, the root for the word of honor, kavod, it means heavy. Kaved is something heavy, right? And so there is a way in which you're handing this kind of weighty thing to this person and saying, can you trust this? And will you take my wishes with appropriate weight, right? Will you weigh them appropriately? And it's not a light handing over. So hopefully you choose someone who you feel has both the strength to carry that responsibility and who knows you well enough to be able to, to put these concepts and values into practice when the time comes. I'll ask our conveners, are there any other questions that you hoped for us to address today?
If anybody wants to just share in by through conversation, please do so. You don't have to answer, put your question in the chat.
I'll just throw out a question, Rabbi. And Howard, if you've had experience when siblings don't agree on when end of life is imminent, might you address that?
That's why you name a proxy. That's why you name one, and you name one person in charge. And they may not agree, the person in charge, with the sibling, but they have the power. And you have an obligation beforehand to explain to them why you chose one and not the other. We have two daughters. One we know will follow our wishes. One we think will follow our wishes, but it's less certain. And we've told them, we think that Jenny understands what we want. And Anne, we think that you understand as well, but we're more confident that Jenny can follow through on what we want. And very frankly, having had that conversation, they understood. And I don't think that, of course, you never know with your children, but I didn't think that Anne's nose was out of joint. She might have been relieved that she wasn't the one who was chosen. This is all about communication.
Because it's a big responsibility, you know, and some people might say, you know, thanks, but no thanks. You know, I don't want to sign up for that. And if you think that there's going to be a lot of strife between the siblings, right? That may be a good reason to choose one of them, or it might be a good reason to choose a friend or someone who's not either of them, so that, you know, they don't carry lifelong resentment about the one who had the proxy made a decision that the other didn't agree with. I don't know.
A tagline with our What Matters program is, it's all about the conversation. It's all about the conversation. And that's your responsibility. Frame your thoughts, execute the right documents, and have the conversation. And then you've done it. Revisit it periodically. Not that hard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Some of what you said just resonated with me. I just wanted to say thank you. One of the things you said was, the memory of someone who dies stays a long time. If we can honor the loved one's wishes, maybe we can make the memories less painful. That sort of stuck with me, as well as the self-determination. You know, a lot of us are, not all of us, but a few of us are social workers, and we're always saying how important self-determination is. So I think you really, both of you, hit the nail on the head. Thank you so much for sharing and reminding us. And I hope people will take the opportunity. Memorial Weekend's coming up. Maybe you can go by the lake and have that conversation with your family member, what your end of life wishes are.
Thank you so much for having us. It's always, it's so meaningful, and we were so honored to get the invitation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye all.